Chapter 1. The Man Who Owned the Night. Isabella Rossi learned the sound of fear long before she learned how to name it. Fear wasn't screaming or crying. It was silence, the kind that settled deep in the lungs, heavy and unmoving, when instinct whispered that something irreversible had already begun. That silence filled the black town car as it slid through the city streets. The driver hadn't spoken since she'd gotten in. Neither had the two men in the front seat. Their suits were flawless, their posture rigid, their presence unmistakable. These weren't chauffeurs. They were escorts of the kind that didn't take no for an answer. Isabella kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, nails biting into her palms. She watched neon lights smear across the tinted window, trying to memorize the city she might never see the same way again. Luca Moretti. The name had followed her for months, whispered in corners, spoken only after checking who might be listening. A man who ruled the city's underworld without ever announcing himself as king. A man whose power came not from noise, but from consequence. And tonight, she was being delivered to him. The car slowed as iron gates appeared out of the darkness. They opened smoothly, like they'd been expecting her. Beyond them rose a mansion carved from shadow and stone, elegant and merciless in its stillness. The car stopped. One of the men stepped out and opened her door. "This way, Miss Rossi." Polite. Calm. Final. Inside, the house swallowed sound. Marble floors reflected dim chandelier light. Every step echoed too loudly, as if the walls themselves were listening. Paintings lined the halls, old money, old violence. Weapons displayed like art. They stopped in front of a set of heavy wooden doors. A single knock. "Enter." The voice was low. Controlled. Absolute. The door opened. Luca Moretti stood with his back to her, hands resting on a wide desk. He wore black from head to toe, tailored perfection that didn't try to impress. He didn't need to. When he turned, Isabella forgot how to breathe. His face was sharp and unreadable, dark eyes locking onto hers with surgical precision. There was no rush in his gaze. No hunger. Just certainty, like he'd already decided who she was and what she was worth. "So," he said calmly, "you're Alessandro Rossi's daughter." "Yes," she answered, forcing steadiness into her voice. He studied her in silence, as if weighing her on an invisible scale. Then he stepped closer. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. "Do you know why you're here? My father owes you money." A faint curve touched his mouth. "Not amusement." "He owes me more than money." Luca circled her slowly. She stayed still, refusing to show fear, though her pulse betrayed her. His attention was suffocating, measured, invasive without touch. "I don't hurt women," he said. "But I don't waste leverage." "I'm not leverage," she said. His eyes snapped to hers. "Everyone is." The silence thickened. "Your father lives," Luca continued. "His debt is settled." Relief surged, then shattered. "Because," he added, "you are now under my protection." The word rang in her ears. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. "It means," he said, stopping directly in front of her, "your life no longer belongs to chance." He lifted her chin with 2 fingers. The touch was restrained, but absolute. Her breath caught despite herself. "You'll stay here," he said. "You'll be watched. You'll be safe. And if I refuse?" His grip tightened just enough to force her gaze up. "There is no refusal." Something dark flickered behind his eyes, not cruelty, but ownership. "Welcome to my world, Isabella Rossi," he said. "You don't leave it unchanged." The door closed behind her. Chapter 2: A Gilded Cage. The room Luca Moretti gave her was larger than the apartment Isabella had grown up in. That was the first cruel irony of it. High ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows veiled in sheer curtains. A king-sized bed dressed in black silk sheets that looked untouched, unused, like they were waiting for permission. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, leather, maybe. Him. Isabella stood just inside the doorway long after the guard had left, unsure whether moving too freely would trigger consequences she couldn't see. This is not a prison, Luca had said. But it wasn't freedom either. She crossed the room slowly, fingertips grazing the edge of a polished desk. No dust. No clutter. Even comfort here felt controlled. Deliberate. A soft knock came at the door. Her spine straightened. Yes. A woman entered, mid-40s, composed, sharp eyes softened by something almost kind. "I'm Maria," she said. "I oversee the household. If you need anything, clothes, food, privacy, you ask me." Isabella searched her face. "Am I allowed to leave this room?" Maria hesitated for half a second too long. "You may walk the east wing during the day," she said carefully. "With escort." So it was a cage. Just lined with silk. After Maria left, Isabella sat on the edge of the bed and let the fear finally breathe. Her hands shook now that she was alone. She pressed them together, grounding herself. She wouldn't break. Fear was exactly what men like Luca Moretti expected. Dinner came on a silver tray she barely touched. Night fell quietly over the estate, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel watched. Isabella changed into one of the dresses left in her closet, black, elegant, fitted as if tailored for her body. She hated that someone had known her size without asking. She had just lain back when the door opened. No knock this time. Luca stepped inside. He didn't apologize. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it casually, like this was his room, like everything was his room. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked faintly with scars she doubted he'd ever explain. "You didn't eat," he said. "I wasn't hungry." A lie. Her stomach twisted constantly. But not from hunger. He crossed the room with unhurried steps and stopped a few feet away. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to dominate the space. "You should eat," he said. "Weakness invites mistakes." She met his gaze. "Am I allowed to make mistakes here?" His mouth curved, not a smile. "No." Silence settled between them again. Heavy. Charged. "Why am I really here?" she asked quietly. His eyes sharpened. "I told you. You said protection." Her voice steadied. "Protection from who?" "From me," he replied without hesitation. Her breath caught. Luca studied her reaction closely, as if this were a test. "You are valuable leverage," he continued. "Not because you are fragile, but because men think you are." "And you?" she asked. "I don't think," he said. "I calculate." He reached out then, not to touch her skin, but to lift a strand of her hair between his fingers. The contact was indirect, yet her pulse spiked like he'd pressed his mouth to her throat. "You will stay close," he said. "You will listen more than you speak. And you will not try to run." "What happens if I do?" she asked. His fingers stilled. His gaze darkened. "I find what's mine." The word sent a dangerous shiver through her. He released her hair and stepped back, restoring distance like it was a favor. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow, you learn how this house breathes." He turned to leave, then paused. "No one touches you," he added, his voice lower now. "Not even me." She looked up sharply. Until you ask, he finished. The door closed behind him. Isabella lay awake long after, heart racing, body humming with a tension she refused to name. Fear and fascination tangled inside her until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Morning came dressed in sunlight and control. 2 guards escorted her through the east wing, past offices and rooms she wasn't allowed to enter. Staff lowered their eyes when Luca passed through halls, but when she passed, curiosity flickered openly. She felt it then, the shift. She wasn't just a guest. She was marked. In the courtyard garden, Luca waited, speaking with a man whose suit couldn't hide the violence coiled beneath his calm. The conversation stopped the moment she arrived. "Leave us," Luca said. The man hesitated, then obeyed. Luca turned to her. "You walk like someone expecting to be struck." "I grew up learning when silence meant danger," she said. "And yet you still stand tall," he observed. "Interesting." He gestured toward the stone bench. "Sit." She did. "You will attend dinners," he said. "Appearances matter. You will say little. Watch everything." "Why teach me?" she asked. "Because ignorance gets people killed." His gaze lingered on her face longer this time, thoughtful. "You're not afraid of me the way you should be." "I am," she said softly. "I just don't let fear choose for me." Something unreadable crossed his expression. Dangerous approval. "Good," he said. "Then you might survive me." Their eyes locked, the air tightening between them, something unspoken pressing close until a distant gunshot echoed from somewhere on the grounds. Isabella flinched. Luca didn't. He stood smoothly, already composed, already lethal. "Welcome to my world," he said again. "It doesn't ask permission." And for the first time, Isabella realized the most dangerous thing about Luca Moretti wasn't his power. It was the restraint he chose to wear around her. Chapter 3. Behind closed doors. The first week under Luca Moretti's roof felt like living inside a storm that refused to break. Isabella moved through the house on invisible threads, every step measured, every glance calculated, yet nothing she did went unnoticed. The servants whispered behind closed doors, their eyes sliding toward her like shadows that followed her every move. She ate breakfast at a long table that gleamed like ice under the chandelier, accompanied by a silent tension thicker than any guard post she had ever imagined. Luca didn't always sit at the table, but she always felt his presence when he wasn't there. His power was like gravity, inescapable, and yet silent. It wasn't fear that occupied her mind. Fear was simple. This was anticipation. A constant edge in the air that made her pulse unpredictable. Every time she walked a corridor, she felt the weight of him watching, waiting, calculating. She didn't know whether she hated it or craved it. That night, after dinner, she found herself in the library, a room larger than her first apartment with walls of books that smelled of aged leather and secrets. She touched the spines reverently, fingers tracing names she couldn't pronounce. Something in her stirred. Knowledge. Power. Loneliness. Then the door closed softly behind her. She didn't need to turn. She knew he was there. "You shouldn't wander alone," Luca said. His voice was calm, almost bored, yet it carried that undertone of danger that made her spine stiffen. "I like to read," she replied evenly, trying not to tremble. He walked toward her slowly, the sound of his steps precise and deliberate. "Curiosity is good," he said. "Naive curiosity gets people killed." She looked up at him, noting the sharp line of his jaw, the dark intensity in his eyes. Her breath caught. "I understand the risk." He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, observing her like he was considering a puzzle only he could solve. "Do you?" he asked quietly. "Do you really understand the risk of being here?" "Yes," she said firmly, though her voice betrayed her. "I understand. And I'm not afraid." Luca's gaze flickered just a hint of amusement, though it didn't reach his mouth. "Good," he said. "Fear can be useful. But it can also make people weak." She kept her eyes on him, trying to hide the rapid beat of her heart. "Then why do you seem to want me afraid?" He tilted his head slightly, an unreadable motion. "I don't want you afraid." His words were quiet, almost intimate. "I want you alive. Alert. Careful. And aware." The tension between them twisted tighter, a coil wound around both their wills. She felt it in her chest, a flutter that bordered on something else, something she didn't dare name. Desire. Fear. Fascination. They all blended into one intoxicating ache. Luca stepped closer, just enough that the heat from his body reached her, brushing the edges of her senses without touching her. "Do you know why I brought you here?" "You said for protection," she murmured. He shook his head slowly. "No. Not just protection. I brought you here because you intrigue me." The words landed like a spark on dry kindling. Her pulse jumped. "Intrigue," she whispered. "Yes," he said, stepping around her, circling her with the precision of a predator. "You're not ordinary. You've been tested by life. You've survived fear, hardship, and danger, and yet you don't collapse under it. That is rare." Isabella swallowed hard. She didn't know how to respond. Every word from him was like a rope tightening around her, drawing her in. She hated that she wanted it. Hated that her pulse leapt when he was near. Luca stopped directly in front of her. She felt the weight of his gaze more than his presence. "You will learn," he said softly, "that in my world, nothing is safe. Nothing is free. And nothing is without consequence." Her lips parted, but no words came. "You will stay here," he continued. "And I will teach you how to survive me." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Survive you?" "Yes," he said simply. "Most people do not survive me. Not my enemies. Not my lovers. Not anyone who underestimates the cost of entering this world." A chill ran down her spine. And yet, the thought of leaving, of escaping, no longer felt urgent. Strange as it was, she found herself wanting to stay, wanting to learn, wanting him. The room seemed to shrink as he leaned closer. Not enough to touch, but enough to feel the heat emanating from him, enough to see the subtle shifts in expression, enough to recognize the promise of danger in every quiet movement. "I am not your enemy," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "But I am not your friend either. I am a test. And whether you pass or fail depends entirely on you." Her chest tightened. "And if I fail?" Luca's eyes darkened, the shadow of a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Then you learn the cost of curiosity," he said. Silence fell. Thick. Electric. Then, just as suddenly, he moved back, turning toward the door. "Go to your room. Sleep. Tomorrow, the lessons begin." Her legs felt unsteady as he left. She pressed her back against the wall, letting her hand rest over her heart. Her body was a battlefield of fear, fascination, and desire. She realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She had no control here. Yet, for the first time in her life, she didn't want it. The nights that followed were a mixture of strict lessons, whispered commands, and moments that made her pulse skip in ways she didn't understand. Luca allowed her glimpses of his world, the network of influence, power, and danger he commanded. He never let her fully in, never allowed her to see the man behind the empire, and yet, every glance, every word, every subtle touch reminded her of his presence, always hovering, always watching, always in control. And in that control, in that dangerous, intoxicating tension, Isabella realized she had already started to fall not into love, not yet, but into obsession. Because surviving Luca Moretti was no longer just about staying alive. It was about wanting him to let her live. Chapter 4. The Enemy's Shadow. The city outside the estate walls was alive with whispers and violence Isabella could feel even from this distance. Cars roared like predators, their headlights slicing the dark. Sirens wailed intermittently, a constant reminder of life's fragility. Inside, the walls were silent, too silent. She wandered the east wing alone, tracing her fingers along the smooth mahogany rails of the staircase. The emptiness pressed against her chest. Luca's warning from the first night echoed relentlessly: curiosity gets people killed. But curiosity was a fire she couldn't extinguish. As she reached the library, she noticed a folder lying atop the desk. It wasn't there before. The envelope was thick, black, and heavy, sealed with red wax stamped with a symbol she didn't recognize. She lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hands as though it carried the weight of a threat. Opening it, her eyes widened. Names. Locations. Faces. Her father's business associates, rival families, men who were friends, men who were enemies. And most troubling of all, a warning scrawled across the top in Luca's precise handwriting: do not share. Do not look uninvited. Her pulse raced. She should have put it back, untouched. But something inside her, a mixture of fear and fascination, forced her to read. Every line pulled her deeper into a dangerous network she barely understood. She recognized the names of people who had whispered about Luca in the streets, who had trembled in the shadow of his empire. And there, among the enemies, were her father's closest allies. Her stomach twisted. If this information fell into the wrong hands, if anyone found her studying it, she would be dead before dawn. The sound of footsteps froze her. She snapped the folder closed, heart hammering. Luca stepped into the library. Always silent. Always precise. "You're awake early," he observed. His eyes lingered on the closed folder. I was curious," she admitted, forcing her voice to steady itself. Curiosity can be fatal," he interrupted, stepping closer. The faint cologne that always followed him wrapped around her senses, intoxicating and dangerous. But it's also what makes some people useful. Her hands trembled. She wanted to tell him she was afraid, but something in her didn't want to seem weak. "I won't betray you," she whispered. He studied her, his gaze sharp, assessing. "I know. That's why you're still alive." She swallowed hard. "Why show me this?" "Because you need to understand," he said, circling her like a shadow. "This world is not kind. It doesn't forgive ignorance. Not to friends, not to family, not even to the curious ones." She looked down at her hands, suddenly aware of how small they felt in his presence. "I understand," she said softly. "No," he said, leaning closer, his voice low, deliberate. "You don't. Not yet. But you will." The air between them tightened, charged with something she didn't want to name. Desire, fear, power, all coiled together, pulling her closer without touch. "Tonight," he continued, "you'll meet some of these allies." His eyes flicked to the folder. "Rivals will be careful around you, for now. They sense what I value, and you've already begun to understand that I do not waste people who intrigue me." She shivered, not from cold. He stepped back, hands in pockets, the shadow of a smile brushing his lips. Stay sharp. Trust no one. Observe everything. And just like that, he left. The door clicked shut, leaving her alone with the knowledge of a world that could swallow her whole. The evening arrived, bringing with it the sound of engines and the scent of expensive suits. Guests arrived at the estate, men in dark tailored clothes, women in gowns that reflected wealth and danger alike. Each one carried the air of power. Isabella realized quickly that among them, nothing was casual. Every glance, every gesture was measured, precise. Every handshake could be a negotiation or a threat. She moved among them like a ghost, silently observing. One man approached her, polite, insistent, offering her a glass of wine. She refused. Another tried to engage her in conversation. She deflected. Always aware, always watching. And then she felt it, a shadow in the corner of the room. Someone watching her, analyzing her movements. Her heart quickened. She couldn't see his face clearly, but the intent was unmistakable. Danger lurked there, and instinct screamed at her to retreat. Before she could react, Luca appeared at her side. Always silent. Always in control. You're being watched, he said softly, his presence a shield. By him. She followed his gaze. The man hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, yet his eyes were fixed on her with a calculated intensity. Who is he? She asked, voice trembling slightly. Enemy, Luca replied. A man who mistakes curiosity for courage. Do not make the same mistake. The shadow of his hand brushed hers, not enough to touch, not enough to feel truly, but enough to make her pulse spike. Stay close to me, he whispered, low, almost intimate. And survive the night. All around them, the gathering continued, oblivious to the tension, the invisible war waging in that room. But Isabella understood now, the night was a battlefield. And she had just stepped onto it. After hours of observing, listening, and barely speaking, she retreated to the privacy of her room. Alone, she allowed herself to exhale. Her mind spun with possibilities, strategies, and dangers. Luca's presence lingered, his shadow, his control, his careful dominance, and she realized she was thinking of him even when she tried not to. For the first time, she admitted it to herself, she wanted his attention. Not just protection. Not safety. Something more. Dangerous. Forbidden. The enemy outside the walls would not wait. The danger in the house was constant. And the man who had claimed her as his own was always watching. Isabella Rossi realized, in the quiet aftermath of the night, that she was no longer simply surviving. She was learning. Learning to navigate a world of shadows, of power, of desire. And most terrifyingly, she was learning to want what she could not have. Chapter 5. A dangerous comfort. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain pounded against the tall windows of the Moretti estate, drumming on the roof with a rhythm that matched the quickening of Isabella's pulse. The house, usually so controlled, now seemed alive, echoing with the wind and the distant roll of thunder. She stood by the window, watching the water streak down the glass. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside her, restless, chaotic, impossible to ignore. Every shadow in the room seemed deeper tonight, as if the darkness itself had something to hide. And it did. A sudden movement behind her made her spin. Luca Moretti leaned against the doorway, his jacket slightly damp from the rain outside. He didn't speak at first. He just observed her. His presence was suffocating, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. You should not be standing there alone, he said finally. His voice was calm, deliberate, yet there was a weight to it, a warning wrapped in silk. I needed air, Isabella admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Not from fear, though fear hovered at the edges, but from the tension that seemed to coil tighter every time he was near. He stepped closer, the floorboards silent under his movement, and she felt the heat of him brush against her even without contact. Storms like this, he said quietly, reveal more than they conceal. They expose weaknesses and desires. Isabella's breath caught. She could feel the electricity in the air, sharp and insistent, pressing against her skin. You're trembling, he observed. His fingers brushed hers accidentally, an impossible, fleeting contact, but enough to send a shiver through her. I'm not, she said, trying to sound steady. But he laughed softly, a low, controlled sound, not mocking, but knowing. You are, he replied. And I am very aware of it. Silence settled, but it was not empty. It was charged, heavy with the things neither of them dared say. She realized, with a mix of fear and thrill, that she had never been this aware of anyone in her life. Not her father. Not friends. Not enemies. Only him. The storm raged on outside, but inside, there was a different kind of storm, a dangerous intimacy she couldn't name. Her pulse quickened as he stepped just close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, yet far enough away to make her ache with restraint. You shouldn't be afraid of me, he said softly, almost a whisper. But you should respect me. I do, she said, her voice firmer now. I respect you. He tilted his head, his dark eyes studying her with a calculating intensity. Respect is complicated, he murmured. Sometimes it's born of fear. Sometimes of desire. Sometimes both. Her throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to step back. Every thought screamed to step closer. She didn't. She began, but the words faltered under his gaze. He closed the distance slightly, enough for her to sense the scent of him, sharp, leather, danger, and something else she couldn't name but wanted to. Do you know what happens, he said slowly, when people get too close without understanding the consequences? She swallowed hard. They get hurt. Or they learn something, he said, his tone almost teasing. Something dangerous. Something intoxicating. Something like this. His hand brushed against her arm, this time not accidental, deliberate, a whisper of contact that made her knees weak. Isabella's heart raced. She wanted to step back. She wanted to flee. And yet, every instinct in her screamed to stay. To feel. To understand him. To be close. You're dangerous, she whispered. And you, he said, leaning just slightly closer, are not afraid of me the way you should be. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away, ashamed. Yet when she dared to glance back, he was still watching her, and in his gaze, she saw something she had never seen before: curiosity, interest, a hint of admiration buried beneath the shadow of danger. The tension between them tightened, coiling into something impossible to ignore. Every movement, every glance, every subtle shift in space spoke volumes. She realized with a shiver that she was thinking of him even when she tried not to. Then the storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows, wind rattling the walls. It felt like a signal, a reminder that control, safety, and comfort were illusions. Only awareness and caution were real. You're learning, he said suddenly, his voice dropping an octave, warm and low. And that is something I appreciate. Her pulse quickened at the sound of his praise, something she didn't expect. Learning what? She asked, almost breathless. Learning who you are in my world, he replied. Learning your limits. And perhaps learning how far you can be tempted before you break. She looked at him, heart pounding, and realized that she didn't want to break away. She didn't want to flee. She wanted something else. Something dangerous, forbidden. And Luca Moretti, in all his silent, impossible power, seemed to know it. He leaned back slightly, breaking the tension, and said casually, "Sleep now. Tomorrow, the real lessons begin." She watched him go, the storm outside fading slightly in comparison to the one raging inside her. Every inch of her body was aware, every nerve alive, every thought consumed by him. And for the first time, Isabella understood the paradox. She was terrified of him, yes. But more than that, she craved the dangerous comfort of being near him. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. It was exactly what she wanted. As she lay in her room that night, storm raging outside, the silk sheets tangled around her, she realized something terrifying. She no longer wanted to escape Luca Moretti. She wanted him. Chapter 6. Betrayal's Kiss. The night was thick with tension. Even the moon seemed to hesitate behind clouds, casting pale shadows over the estate grounds. Isabella had learned by now that the quietest nights were often the most dangerous. She felt it in the air, movement where it shouldn't be, silence louder than any warning. She had been sitting in the library, poring over the ledger of contacts Luca had given her, when a noise made her freeze. Footsteps soft, deliberate on the marble floor. She looked up, heart hammering. A familiar figure emerged from the shadowed hallway, one of Luca's trusted lieutenants, smiling in that easy, friendly way that now sent a chill through her. "Isabella," he said smoothly, approaching, "I thought I'd check on you. Luca is busy tonight." Something in his tone felt off. Too casual. Too rehearsed. She clenched the edge of the desk. "I'm fine," she said evenly, though every instinct screamed that she was not. He tilted his head, studying her, then crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm here to help." Before she could respond, a pair of hands grabbed her from behind. Isabella gasped, struggling, realizing she had been betrayed. "Shush," a low voice whispered. "No one will hurt you if you come quietly." Her mind raced. Betrayal. Who? Why? Every scenario spiraled into danger. She could feel the threat in the air, sharp and immediate. Her pulse raced. The man who had grabbed her didn't speak again. He guided her silently, taking paths she didn't know existed in the sprawling estate. They moved like shadows through the halls, avoiding cameras, guards, and even the knowledge of the house itself. Isabella realized with horror that she was completely at the mercy of this stranger. Finally, he stopped in a small room at the far end of the estate, one she didn't recognize. He turned to her, face hidden in shadow. "You're clever," he said, voice smooth, almost mocking. "But not clever enough to survive the world you've stepped into. Why are you doing this?" Isabella demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "Who sent you?" "A friend," he said with a faint smirk. "A friend who wants to make sure Luca learns the cost of his attachments." The words sank in. Her father. His allies. Luca's enemies. Everything she had learned, every whispered warning, every dangerous glance, it all pointed to one terrifying reality. She had been used as leverage. "Stay calm," he said, stepping closer. She could feel the heat from his body, threatening, dangerous. "No one will hurt you yet. Not until I deliver my message." Her mind raced. She had to survive. She had to think. She had to find a way back to him, back to Luca. Then she felt it, a faint memory, a touch she could almost feel. Luca's hand brushing hers in the library, his voice low and commanding, his eyes dark with warning. She realized suddenly that he had prepared her for this. Every lesson, every subtle command, every moment of tension, he had been ready for betrayal. "You won't succeed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He will find me." The stranger laughed softly, a sound that made her shiver. "Perhaps. But first, we see how much he truly values you." Before she could respond, he leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek, not passionate, not affectionate, but a calculated, violating act meant to unnerve, to mark, to confuse. A betrayal's kiss. Isabella recoiled, heart racing, fury mingling with fear. She forced herself to remain composed, to breathe, to think. Escape wasn't just necessary, it was survival. Outside, the storm had returned, wind howling, rain pounding against the windows. It was as if the world itself conspired with her panic, every sound amplified, every shadow alive. Her mind raced through possibilities, every corridor, every lock, every hidden path Luca had shown her. She remembered his words: observe, learn, survive. Every lesson became her lifeline. Minutes passed like hours. The stranger underestimated her. She waited for the perfect moment, muscles coiled, senses sharpened. When he turned to retrieve something from a desk, she twisted free from his hold and ran. The hallways were a blur. She could hear her own heartbeat, the drip of water from a leaky ceiling, the distant shuffle of someone else moving. Adrenaline pushed her forward, faster, sharper, more aware than she had ever been. Then she saw him. Luca Moretti stood at the end of the hall, silhouette illuminated by a flash of lightning. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just observed, as always, his eyes cold, calculating, impossibly precise. Isabella collided with him, relief flooding her in a wave she barely allowed herself to acknowledge. "I told you," he said quietly, brushing rain from his sleeve, "curiosity can get you into trouble. But cleverness will get you out." The stranger tried to intervene, but Luca's movement was fluid, lethal. In seconds, the man was disarmed, restrained, and under Luca's control. Isabella could barely watch, heart pounding, a mixture of fear, awe, and something deeper she refused to name. Luca's hand found hers, steady, warm, grounding. She realized the subtle difference. He was calm, controlled, dominant, not a predator but a protector who chose exactly how far to let danger touch her. "You are safe," he said, voice low, dark, intimate. "For now." Her body trembled, and not from cold. Every nerve screamed at her, and she realized she had never felt so alive. Danger and desire, fear and fascination, had collided in a way she couldn't escape. "Why did you stay?" she asked softly, voice barely audible. "Because," he said, eyes locking onto hers, "I always know when someone tries to take what is mine. And I do not lose." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to speak, to touch, to reach, but she didn't. She wanted him, and she feared it. She feared the obsession she could already feel taking root in her chest. "Sleep now," he said finally, releasing her hand. "You need strength for tomorrow. The world we inhabit is unforgiving." As he walked away, leaving her alone in the storm, Isabella allowed herself one trembling breath. The betrayal had nearly broken her, but it hadn't. And for the first time, she understood the full measure of Luca Moretti's influence. He didn't just protect her. He shaped her, honed her, tested her, and in that dangerous balance of fear and trust, a part of her had begun to belong to him. Chapter 7: The Price of Power. The city never slept, but neither did the fire that raged inside Luca Moretti. By dawn, the betrayal had been dealt with. His enemies, cunning and dangerous as they were, had learned a lesson in ruthlessness and in the unwavering reach of his power. Isabella watched quietly from the safety of the estate's upper floors, a mixture of awe and fear clinging to her like a second skin. Luca's world was a delicate architecture of loyalty, fear, and brutal efficiency. Every move was calculated, every decision precise, yet the weight of it all rested heavily on his shoulders. He didn't show it, not to his allies, not to his enemies, and certainly not to her. But she saw it. She had spent the night pacing the library, running scenarios in her mind, imagining how she could survive, how she could anticipate danger, how she could belong in his world without losing herself. And by morning, she realized that the lesson she had learned was this: power demanded sacrifice. Isabella stepped into the courtyard to find him already there. Rain had left the stone wet and gleaming, mist curling around the edges of the fountain. He stood like a king surveying his domain, the storm that lingered in the air reflected in the intensity of his gaze. "You're up early," she said, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I never sleep through danger," he replied. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. "Do you understand what happened last night?" "Yes," she said softly. "But why show me? Why let me see that world?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "you needed to understand that this world does not forgive mistakes. And because you were part of it whether you realized it or not." Her pulse quickened as he circled her slowly, assessing her. "And yet," he continued, "you survived it. Not because I saved you. Not because luck intervened. Because you are clever." The compliment was dangerous. Her stomach fluttered. She wanted to look away, to deny the rising heat, but she couldn't. She was aware of every inch of him, every subtle movement, every dark promise in the set of his jaw and the glint in his eyes. "You're learning," he said quietly, stepping so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Not just to survive but to endure. To command, to anticipate. To be mine." Her breath hitched. She realized with a shiver that the words possessive, commanding, intoxicating had pierced deeper than fear could. They had awakened something she didn't fully understand, something both thrilling and terrifying. "Luca," she began, voice trembling, "I don't know if I can." "You will," he interrupted. His hand brushed hers, deliberate, holding for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. The contact was electric, sending a tremor through her body she couldn't hide. "And if you can't, I will ensure you learn. My way." Isabella's lips parted, caught between defiance and desire. The storm had returned in her chest, a tempest she didn't want to escape. She had survived danger, betrayal, fear. But now she realized she was learning something far more consuming: how it felt to stand in his orbit, to be marked by him without question, to crave what he offered and feared in equal measure. The distant sound of a car horn pulled her attention outward. Luca's gaze followed hers, sharp and precise. "There are still enemies who think they can test me. They will be corrected." She shivered, not from the wind. "And what about me?" "You are not to be harmed," he said simply, his tone absolute. "Not by them. Not by anyone. Not without my permission." The words sank deep. They were protective. They were possessive. They were binding. A silence followed, thick and intimate, charged with the weight of unspoken promises. Isabella felt it pressing against her chest, pulling her closer to him even as the world outside threatened chaos. "You are learning the price of power," he said finally, voice low and deliberate. "It's not given lightly. It's taken. And sometimes the cost is higher than you think you can bear." She looked up at him, her pulse quickening. "And the cost for me?" His eyes darkened, intense and unyielding. You are already paying it, he said. In fear. In desire. In obedience. In trust. The words struck her harder than any blow, leaving her breathless, trembling, and acutely aware of the heat rising in her body. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to feel the dangerous comfort of his presence, but she didn't. Not yet. She wasn't allowed, and he wouldn't permit it. Instead, he stepped back, breaking the charged tension, leaving her standing alone in the misty courtyard. His gaze lingered, impossibly heavy, before he finally turned and disappeared inside, leaving the storm behind him and leaving her aware, more than ever, of what it meant to be near him. Alone, Isabella let her knees buckle slightly, her fingers pressed to her chest. Every lesson, every betrayal, every moment of fear and desire had shaped her into someone new. Someone more aware. Someone sharper. Someone irrevocably tied to him. And she realized, with both dread and thrill, that she didn't want to escape. She wanted him. Not just for safety, not just for survival, not just for protection. She wanted to stand in his world, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, danger and desire entwined, and claim her place at his side. The price of power was high, and she was willing to pay it. Chapter 8. Shadows of Desire. The estate was quiet, deceptively quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Isabella moved through the halls with a new confidence, honed from weeks of observing, learning, surviving. She was no longer simply a guest or a prisoner, she was a participant in Luca's world. And yet, every step carried the weight of danger. The candlelight in the library flickered as she approached the desk, where a single envelope awaited her. No wax seal this time, just her name, written in Luca's unmistakable handwriting. Her pulse quickened as she broke the flap. Inside was a single card, black with silver lettering. Tonight, you learn to choose. Her breath caught. She knew what it meant without reading further. Luca's lessons were no longer about survival, they were about trust, desire, and boundaries. Before she could dwell on it, the door opened, and he stepped inside. Always silent. Always imposing. The storm outside had returned, rain tapping a steady rhythm on the windows, but it was nothing compared to the tempest in the room. You read the card, he said, his voice low and measured, letting the weight of each word press against her. Yes, she whispered. I understand. He approached, slow, deliberate, a predator's grace in every step. Do you? He asked, stopping just a foot away. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the sharp scent of leather and danger. I think so, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He studied her, eyes dark, intense, unblinking. You have grown, he said finally. Stronger. Sharper. More aware. But are you ready to face desire without fear? Isabella's heart raced. She understood the question. This wasn't just about physical proximity, it was about trust, about control, about surrendering in a world where giving in could be dangerous. I want to try, she admitted. Luca's lips curved, just slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. Good, he said. But remember, this world does not forgive hesitation. Only those who are certain survive its lessons. He stepped closer, closer than she had ever allowed anyone. She could feel the brush of his sleeve against her arm, the faint heat of his chest a mere breath away. Desire coiled tightly in her, dangerous, irresistible, forbidden. You will choose, he whispered, low, almost intimate. You will decide how far you allow yourself to be claimed. And I will respect your answer. But know this, the moment you step closer to me, the consequences are yours. Every inch, every heartbeat, every breath. Isabella's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to reach out, to touch, to feel, but fear and longing twisted together in a cruel dance. She wanted him. She wanted to surrender. And yet she hesitated. Luca's eyes softened, just slightly, an almost imperceptible flicker of vulnerability buried beneath the shadows of power. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "I think I do," she whispered. "Good," he said, brushing a hand along hers just barely, just a whisper of contact, but enough to make her knees weak. "Then step closer." Her breath hitched as she moved, uncertain, trembling, yet drawn irresistibly to him. The air between them became charged, electric, a magnetic pull she could not resist. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the storm outside, a perfect, dangerous symphony. "Closer," he urged softly, low and commanding, the shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "Closer, Isabella." She did. Every nerve alive, every sense sharpened. She could feel his presence enveloping her, dominating, protective, irresistible. Fear and desire tangled in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. He reached out, brushing a hand along her jaw, tilting her head up so their eyes met. His gaze was dark, unreadable, and yet something intimate flickered in it. "You are mine to guide," he whispered. "And yet you may choose. Always. That is the lesson tonight." She shivered, caught between the desire to surrender and the fear of losing herself. "I choose you," she murmured finally, voice soft but unwavering. Luca's hand lingered against her cheek, warm and commanding, a promise and a warning all at once. "Good," he said, voice low, deliberate. "Then let the lesson begin." He leaned closer, not pressing fully, not yet, but the proximity was enough to make her ache with anticipation. Breath mingled with hers, heartbeat racing in tandem, as the storm outside roared in wild agreement with the tempest inside. They remained like that for long moments, suspended in the tension of what could be, of what was forbidden yet inevitable. Isabella realized with a shiver that surrendering to him was not weakness, it was a choice, dangerous, intoxicating, and entirely her own. When he finally stepped back, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken promises. Isabella's chest heaved, mind spinning, aware that everything had changed. She had crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back. Outside, the storm continued, relentless and unyielding. Inside, desire and danger coiled tightly around them, binding them together in a dance of power, trust, and forbidden longing. Isabella understood now that Luca Moretti was not just a man of power, he was a force of nature. And to survive, to endure, to belong, she would have to match him, step for step, heartbeat for heartbeat. The lesson had begun. Chapter 9. The Edge of Control. The night was alive with danger, whispered rumors, and the quiet hum of the city that never truly slept. Isabella moved through the halls of the estate like a shadow herself, her senses sharper than ever. She had learned the lessons Luca had forced her to learn: observation, patience, anticipation, but the most dangerous lesson of all was something he had not explicitly taught: desire. It clung to her like a second skin, a constant, insistent pull toward him she could neither deny nor escape. Every word he spoke, every glance, every subtle gesture seemed designed to draw her closer, to test her limits without overtly crossing them. And she wanted it. She stepped into the grand hall, where a soft light flickered from crystal chandeliers. Luca was already there, as always, waiting. Not impatiently, not aggressively, but with the silent authority of a man who owned every inch of this world. "You're late," he observed, though his tone was soft, almost teasing. "I lost track of time," she replied, heart racing as she stepped closer. Every step felt like crossing a line she wasn't allowed to cross and yet wanted to. He studied her, dark eyes unreadable, intense. "Do you know why you are here tonight?" "Yes," she whispered. "To learn." "Good," he said. His voice dropped an octave, warm and commanding, drawing her attention to the subtle shift in his presence. "Tonight, we see how far control and desire can stretch before breaking." Her pulse quickened. She had felt this before: storms, danger, betrayal, but tonight was different. Tonight, the tension between them was palpable, sharp, dangerous. It was as if the air itself had been charged with their unspoken connection. "Step closer," he commanded softly, just enough for her to feel the heat of his presence, without touching her. She obeyed. Each step brought her closer to him, closer to the edge she had been teetering on for weeks. Every nerve in her body was alive, every breath stolen. "Do you trust me?" he asked, voice low, deliberate, a whisper that pressed against her skin more than his hand ever could. "I think I do," she admitted, trembling despite herself. "Good," he said. His eyes softened, just enough to reveal a flicker of something hidden beneath the shadows of power. "Trust is the only thing that allows you to survive and to want what is dangerous." Isabella felt the pull of him, the magnetic force she could no longer resist. She could sense the tension in the room, the unspoken promises and threats interwoven with desire. She wanted to reach out, to cross the line they both danced around, but she paused, aware of the stakes. He stepped closer, the heat radiating from his body wrapping around her, suffocating and intoxicating. "Tonight," he murmured, voice low, deliberate, "you learn the cost of surrender and the power in choice." Her breath hitched. Desire coiled tightly inside her, a storm threatening to break through every restraint she had fought to maintain. She had survived betrayal, threats, danger, but she had never faced the lure of him so completely. "You may step back," he continued, "or you may step forward. But every step is a choice. Every heartbeat matters." Her chest heaved as she processed the words. She wanted to step forward. She wanted to feel the boundary of danger and desire blur, to confront the intoxicating, terrifying pull of him. "Forward," she said softly, voice trembling but determined. Luca's eyes darkened with approval, sharp, unreadable, and yet undeniably intimate. "Good," he said. "Then let the lesson begin." He moved closer still, not touching. Not yet, but the proximity alone was enough to make her ache. The tension between them was palpable, almost unbearable, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and longing. Every inch, every breath, every subtle movement was a test. "You are mine to guide," he whispered, voice low and deliberate, "and yet the choice remains yours. Every inch, every heartbeat, every decision." She shivered, aware of the electricity crackling in the air, aware that surrendering to him was not weakness but a choice, dangerous, intoxicating, and entirely hers. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her chest. Rain pounded against the windows, lightning illuminating fleeting moments of their closeness. She wanted him. She feared him. She needed him, and she had never been more alive. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice low, a whisper that seemed to echo directly into her soul. "Yes," she breathed, trembling. "I understand." He stepped back slightly, giving her space, but the tension remained. The room felt charged with anticipation, the promise of something dangerous, forbidden, inevitable. "You are ready," he said finally, voice deliberate, commanding, soft. "Tomorrow, you will face the final test. One that will determine if you can survive and if you are truly mine." Isabella's chest heaved, heart pounding. She knew, instinctively, that the night had changed her. She had survived, learned, and wanted. The boundaries between fear, desire, and loyalty had blurred, and she realized that she had already surrendered more than she had intended. But the surrender was not weakness. It was power. And the edge of control was where she thrived. As Luca disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the storm, Isabella felt the intoxicating mixture of fear and desire course through her. The city outside raged on, oblivious to the dangerous, forbidden connection that had taken root inside the walls of the estate. She knew the final test awaited. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. And she also knew, with a shiver of anticipation, that she wanted him to claim her not out of fear, but because she had chosen it. The storm outside continued, relentless, echoing the storm that had begun inside her. And for the first time, she welcomed it. Chapter 10. Claimed by Shadows. The city lights glimmered through the rain-streaked windows like distant stars, cold, unreachable, yet impossibly tempting. Isabella stood in the grand hall, her pulse still racing from the tension of the past nights. She had survived danger, betrayal, and desire. She had learned the rules of Luca Moretti's world, and now, she was ready to face the final test. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her chest, chaotic, electric, alive. Every nerve was taut, every thought focused on him. The lessons had been merciless: trust, observation, patience, endurance. But the ultimate lesson tonight was one she had been waiting for: choice, surrender, and the intoxicating blur of fear and desire. Luca appeared, silent as always, emerging from the shadows like a king from the depths of his empire. The weight of his presence pressed against her, commanding, magnetic, irresistible. His dark eyes met hers, unyielding, calculating, yet with a subtle softness that made her ache in ways she could not name. "You are ready," he said, voice low, deliberate, a rumble that made the air itself tremble. "Tonight, you will decide. Not me. You." Every heartbeat, every breath, every step. Isabella's throat went dry. She stepped closer, drawn by the invisible pull he exuded. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice trembling with anticipation and fear. "Good," he murmured, moving closer as well. Their proximity alone sent shivers racing through her body. Heat radiated between them, charged and dangerous. Every instinct screamed to step back. Every instinct screamed to step forward. And she chose to step forward. The first contact was almost ceremonial, a brush of his hand along hers, deliberate, controlled, setting her nerves on fire. It was not aggressive, not possessive in the violent sense. It was a claim, a declaration, a promise. Isabella's breath hitched. "You have learned much," Luca said, voice low, intimate. "You have survived my world, endured the lessons, and emerged stronger than I expected." Her eyes met his, and she understood without words. The final test was not about survival alone. It was about surrender, about desire, about letting herself be claimed while still keeping the fire of her independence. "I trust you," she whispered, barely audible. "I want this. I want you." For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with tension. Then he leaned closer, not fully pressing against her, but close enough that her senses reeled. His gaze held hers, dark and commanding. "And so you shall have it," he said. "But know this, Isabella Rossi, once you step fully into this, there is no turning back. You will be mine, body, mind, and soul. And I will protect you, guide you, and claim you, but the world will always test us. Always." She swallowed hard, heart racing. "I understand. I am ready." He extended a hand, gentle yet commanding. She placed hers in his. The contact was electric. Every pulse, every beat, every nerve awakened. For a moment, the world outside the city, the storm, the dangers lurking in shadows faded into insignificance. "You are mine," he whispered. Not in anger. Not in cruelty. But in possession, protection, and desire. "I am yours," she replied, voice trembling, surrendering to the inevitable pull that had grown over weeks. And then, at last, the storm broke both outside and within the room. Luca's hands lifted hers to his chest, and the barrier of hesitation dissolved. The kiss that followed was slow, deliberate, and intoxicating. It was not just a kiss of lust, but of promise, of power, of surrender and trust entwined. Isabella felt herself melt into him, every fear, every desire, every lesson converging in this singular moment. When they parted, breathless, Isabella realized she had never felt more alive. She had survived the danger, endured the lessons, faced betrayal, and confronted desire, and now, she had claimed her place beside him. Luca's dark eyes lingered on hers, and she knew he felt it too, the draw, the obsession, the inescapable pull. He had tested her. He had taught her. And now, he had claimed her not by force, but by choice. "Rest now," he murmured, his hand brushing hers one last time before he stepped back, leaving a lingering heat on her skin. "Tomorrow, the world continues to demand vigilance. But tonight you have earned this." Alone, Isabella allowed herself to exhale fully for the first time. She had crossed the threshold into a world she could not leave, and she had done so willingly. The danger remained, the enemies still plotted, but she was no longer just a pawn. She was a participant, a survivor, and something more. She smiled faintly, trembling, knowing the truth she had always feared to admit. She wanted him not just for protection, not just for survival, but for the storm, the danger, the power, and the intoxicating pull of his presence. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. Inside, the echoes of the storm were replaced by the quiet hum of electricity still vibrating between them. Isabella knew her life had changed forever. She belonged to Luca Moretti, and in return, he had claimed her in a way that was dangerous, thrilling, and inescapable. The final lesson had been learned. The final test had been faced. And the fire between them, desire, trust, obsession, and passion, would burn, fierce and unrelenting, for the rest of their lives. Isabella Rossi was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. She was alive. And she was his.